So it is 6:02. So let's call the meeting to order. So thanks everybody for coming on a great, nice and warm day. So appreciate you joining us here. And if you're on virtually, appreciate you joining us virtually. So some administrative items. First thing on the agenda is to confirm our agenda. Does anybody have any modifications or changes you'd like to make to the agenda? None? Can I get a motion to approve the agenda? Okay, thanks, Martin. Is there a second? Okay, thanks, Colette. Any objections? Okay, without objection, the agenda is approved. Next, we have the approval of our April minutes. They were sent out by email, and administrative items, you can just forward straight to Mark, like grammatical things, etc. Any other changes that anybody wanted to make to the minutes? Okay. Could I get a motion to approve the minutes for our April meeting minutes? Okay, thanks, Drew. Is there a second? Okay, thanks, Andrew. Any objection to approval of our April minutes? Seeing no objection, the minutes are approved. All right, so first thing we wanted to do is just do a slight recap of not the full last meeting, but basically one of the items we talked about at our last meeting in April was work items for the committee. And so like when certain things occur, one of the first work items we have is actually today's meeting is the annual report. So what I asked Mark to do is could we just put up a quick schedule recap, because that way you can see if there's certain comments that you want to make about certain topics, the annual report might be appropriate for them, or the annual report might not be appropriate for them. There might be a work meeting later on in the year where those items are more appropriate. So I just wanted to make sure we just did a slight recap. Okay, here's the work items we have scheduled for the rest of the year. So that way you can see where the annual report fits and where comments you have will fit. So Mark?
Right. So earlier this spring is when Office Planning and Zoning was preparing this annual report. And again, this annual report is formatted and structured a little differently than how we have done them in the past. And I'll get into what some of those key changes are and why we're doing or having a different format. So here we are late spring we missed it by 2 or 3 days, where we will now present this annual report, an evaluation on the progress of those strategies, mainly the implementation matrix that you see at the back of the 2023 Odenton Town Center Master Plan. So clearly when you're developing a plan, we were working on this probably 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. And we're all working around the table and everything sounds great, looks great. And then when it gets adopted after a couple of years, and then when you get your first sort of annual report, you're looking back and saying, well, that one's, or those two strategies are sort of seem redundant, or maybe we have lost sight of what the intent of that strategy may be, or for how we're going to measure success of that strategy. Maybe it doesn't make sense anymore, and maybe there's a better way to measure it. So we'll get into that, but just want to sort of see that as we go through this discussion, and we can talk about if there are opportunities to sort of interpret things different ways, or how we want to evaluate those. So your role for this evening is, again, as we go through this, we're going to be asking whether, again, you agree with how we've interpreted it, whether you agree with, if this strategy has been completed, or if there's a different sort of direction you want to take with it, or in our notes section, or where we have sort of the qualitative analysis, if you want to have us add something or sort of explain it a little bit differently. Recommended a change in status. So when we typically meet with Jason and Martin before these meetings, just to sort of go over the flow of the meeting. And Jason had the suggestion of maybe we want to provide another category instead of just completed, in progress, or not started. Maybe there's an ongoing category, or maybe there's another category of trending up, trending down, or something in that. Right? So again, we can have a discussion about that. You'll also see in the annual report that there are timeframes, short, mid, long. And again, if there are any short-term, since we're still within that 0 to 5 year timeframe, if there are any that short-term that you would like to see done, or take a priority over others, would love to hear about that. And in some cases, these may be capital projects. And if you remember, we have a capital project priority letter that's written in the fall, which kicks off the county's budget process. So again, as if it's a capital project, that might be something that we just, or we can talk about it tonight, but that would be something then that would be reflected in that letter that you all to send to the county in the fall. And then as Jason was saying, is alluding to is recommending ideas for the next master plan update. So while we may not make changes to the strategies in the implementation chart in the annual report of the master plan, you can certainly throw out ideas of what you'd like to see in the next master plan, if it's master plan appropriate, or if it's something that might be more, say, code related or a requirement that could actually be done in the short term through an amendment to the county code, which regulates what you can and can't do with property, bulk regs, forbidden uses, things like that.
Yes, so Mark, if we went back and looked at what worked, what didn't, or how effective maybe some of the policies or the language that we had in there,
Yep.
that could be a guide for us then to say what the next version might be like.
Absolutely, right. Yeah, I would say, as we do this next year and the next 2 or 3 years, before we actually then start the next master plan update, I would imagine we're gonna have several tweaks to how some of these strategies are written, if they haven't been accomplished yet, right? I think there's a lot to learn over these next 5 years, so, yep. Okay, so, and then the other thing too is, while Sam and I are not experts in everything that you see within the implementation chart, we are happy to reach out to the experts in the respective departments and invite them in, depending upon their availability and time, bring them in hopefully during the summer, and they can share some more information about why that strategy may or may not have been implemented so far, or if there's any other nuance to the explanation. Again, we can talk about that and potentially invite them in during the summer. Then again, looking ahead to late summer is where we start talking about the priority project list, which is capital projects. Year-end review is where we can then go over sort of consolidate our comments about anything related to potential updates to the next master plan, or again, if it's something more short-term that's related to the code or requirements, that could be put in for a memo. We can talk about that in the fall. And then some ongoing things I think we're all familiar with as well. All good with just sort of a brief recap of the yearly work plan again. It's now over 2 slides, because when I looked at this again, I added a couple more bullet points. So again, as we can continually add to it if we need more clarification as we go on.
So Mark, just a comment on the slides. I actually really like how you laid out clearly what the committee has to do in terms of like your previous slide, where you have the red box. So I think as these slides evolve, I actually like how you're expanding each block. And so like, I would expand the block as necessary for whatever the work item is, and just interchange in the slides. I think that's a fantastic way to make it clear to the committee as to what you'd like from us in this meeting.
Okay. Do you want to see this at every meeting?
I would say my recommendation is the work items, like whatever, like today's meeting is an annual work item, like when the next work item comes up. So like during the summertime, there's no work items, but in your next slide, there's the priority projects. Is the next big work item. So I would expand out the late summer block, make it bigger. Okay, what are we expecting the OTCAC to do at this meeting where we're specifically working on the priority projects letter? In terms of may do this and may not do this, because then we all have the clear guidelines for what is expected for that work meeting. Okay. So I think this is going to evolve into a great kind of agenda through an entire year. Then once we cover all these items, it's like background.
Yeah. So, okay. So then jumping into the annual report, I've just got this one slide, and then I can flip over to putting up the draft annual report up on the screen and sharing it with folks at home. So again, it's just a progress report of the strategies from the master plan. The format has changed because it is now more of a visioning document. If you remember the 2016 plan, that's where a lot of the requirements were. Those have now migrated over to the code, and the master plan now sort of reads as this menu of work plans or tasks for not only the Office of Planning, but also other departments, as well as county council and the county executive. And again, we try to base it on timeframes, short, middle, long, to provide some type of guidance then to our decision makers. Again, the format is a little bit different. We've tried to really sort of sprinkle with some pictures.
And was it deduplicated? Because I think I've downloaded it twice.
Okay. So at max, we're looking at 12 unique downloads, I should say,
Okay,
from
good.
external
Good.
parts, right? So some
Well, I'm
clarification.
one, so it's 11 other people.
Okay, so the structure of the Odenton Town Center Master Plan Annual Report, we just have a brief introduction. What we did carry over from the previous iterations of the annual report is providing a space for a summary of what you all had discussed over the past year. I think that's always important. You all are a committee, it's very unique from the other two town centers. And some other master plans that we have within the county regularly. So the rural town center doesn't have a committee. There is no Glen Burnie master plan or committee. And the green infrastructure master plan, for example, I think that's compiled internally by our department heads as well. So again, it's a little unique. So I think it's nice to add a recap of what we discussed over the past year. And then we have 5 chapters: our natural environment, built environment, healthy communities, healthy economy, and process procedures. So we just provide some stats, highlights, call out some important projects that have happened or key stats that have occurred over the past year. And then lastly, which is sort of the bulk of it, is this implementation matrix, which you would find in the 2023 master plan. But we add 2 more columns indicating the status, like I said, in progress, not completed, or completed, or sorry, not started, I guess, not yet started, completed, and in progress, as well as a section for us to explain why or why not, or something may have occurred over the past year. Okay, so if there are any questions, I'll jump over to then pulling up the master plan or the annual report rather up on the screen.
I just have one quick question in terms of process tonight. Is this meeting today the purpose to vote? Or are we discussing and then sending additional feedback in the interim and then voting in the next meeting?
Good question, right? So tonight, or let me back up to, is per code, the Odenton Town Center Advisory Committee provides a recommendation on the annual report. You provide a letter to us with a recommendation. So Office Planning and Zoning, we're the ones that finish up the plan, right? So we'll gather input from you, we'll take that into consideration, and then we'll wrap it up over the next, few weeks or so. So the intent, so to answer your question, is tonight, get all the comments out there so that Jason can send us a letter in the next couple of weeks. Okay.
Right, so just to clarify, so a letter of our comments and thoughts and feedback, because there's no approval of the annual report. It's here's our comments and feedback.
Right, I mean, yeah, you could recommend approval.
Right.
But
But doesn't, because it's a required item. We don't approve the county's thoughts, right?
Yeah.
okay, let me just go to full screen. Okay, and I'll provide just a very brief recap, but I do want to open it up then for once you all do a lot of the talking here tonight, to share your thoughts about any direction we want to take within, say, the body of the document, as well as then the implementation matrix.
And so, Mark, I think you're like one of the items that the committee, whatever this just said, was there's 2 pieces to this. The first is the front body, and then the second part would be the implementation strategies. So there's going to be 2 aspects to our comment period.
So again, just a very brief overview about the plan. Again, when we were talking with Jason before the meeting, he suggested maybe just for this first year, we include a little more description about why it's changing and the different structure of it. I know some of it we allude to it a little bit here, or in the introduction, mainly up here at the top. But again, we'll take another look at this and see if we can just add a little more explanation and detail as to if somebody picks up the 2023 report and then picks up this 2025 report and wonder why they're different. So we've got that note. Then for the Odenton Town Center Advisory Committee, again, a brief overview. Again, if you've all had a chance to review this, one of the questions that I had asked in one of the emails was, is there anything then from previous annual reports that we want to pull forward and maybe put into this section of this year's annual report? So I'll open it up.
I don't have anything to answer your question specifically, Mark, but on the paragraph, the top right, we talk about things that major themes there. I really like the way this is written because we do talk about green technologies. But many times in this committee, we talked about PT, of transportation.
Sorry.
Public transportation, you know, first and last mile issues about, you know, let me explain that. You know, parking garage is gonna be great. But if more people can park over here, they're likely just to drive. And if you've ever seen now federal government's back to going to the office every day, the traffic on 170 and 175, that corner is really horrendous, 85 point for that. The idea is to get people out of their cars and provide them a better way to get to the station. So a lot of people live in the area, not that far away, we get our driving. So I think, I just want to make sure that whoever reads this, right from the beginning, this is something important that we need to pay attention to. Not just PT in general, but also the first and last mile to get them from their homes to the station.
Okay. Yeah, we can add that within this.
I'd say also when we say public art, and we do talk about art, or at least I know I mention art a lot, but maybe to say instead placemaking or creative placemaking, wayfinding.
Okay.
Because I think residents understand the public art might just be like, oh, a sculpture or something, instead of more tangible cohesiveness.
And how about, you see that again, you're talking about wayfinding to the art?
The creative placemaking aspect or can include things like wayfinding or different types of pop-ups or creative outlets. I think when people hear just public art, they just might think of stagnant things like sculptures or mural instead of things that can be more cohesive of bringing community, which is what placemaking aims to do.
Yeah. And I think that did come up over the past year. I just want to be true that this is just a reflection of the past year and not sort of looking ahead and what could be fit into, say, a new strategy or new vision, right? I just want to stay true to it.
Now, I would say this, in terms of, we have discussed where we want to ensure that development are places where people want to go. And that there are, the layout makes sense for people to not just drive there, but also walk there. Has come up, which I think fits into what Abigail was saying, is that exterior needs to be inviting.
Make it a destination.
Yes, the committee has talked about that in different places in terms of review how those look or how the site is laid out. So I don't believe it would be dishonest.
Yeah.
Anything from the previous annual reports anybody found that you're wondering if they should be added or where they would go?
We're talking about the first half of this draft.
Yes.
I did notice that, a lot of the data that we had in the previous report was
Mhm.
missing completely. In terms of like the adequate public facilities information. And I don't know if it's possible to keep that in as an appendix. Just because I think it is valuable information to have to look back year over year where some of the shifts are.
Yeah, that was the one thing I noticed, tables 5 through 11, roughly,
Yeah.
I remember in 2017, 2018, we had a bunch of discussions to actually have a lot of this get added. And so, it's hard to fit, so it's trying to figure out like where this fits,
Mhm.
making sure that it doesn't go away and disappear, I think is important.
So this information comes from the educational facilities master plan. And I wonder if, again, rather than sort of just adding more to this document, that we can just provide maybe an explanation and say, if you're looking for this information, go to the, where they have their reports. Because there you could also probably find previous years as well.
I mean,
and
could
do
there
that
be
comparison.
a resources page
Yeah.
added that
Yeah.
includes?
Yeah.
Like links to some of these things, because our
Sure.
priority list for projects wasn't in here either. Which I think we've had in the past. And I think it's nice to have like a comprehensive place where you can go to find all things Odenton.
The primary project is in here.
Yeah.
It's an appendix.
The letter.
The letter is, but not not the matrix in the list.
The second page of the letter includes the list.
Yeah, it has the letter and it has the table.
Well,
Are the adequacy of sewer, water, demand projections, population of fund forecasts found in other reports then as well?
Sewer and water will be found in the water sewer master plan.
Mhm.
And that's where this data is being pulled from as well.
And that gets updated every 3 years. So, yeah, you wouldn't see a change then until you hit that 3-year cycle.
Right.
I mean, even including some of the projects where Odenton is mentioned, the transit development plan, even in now, the transportation, the move and whatever,
Yeah, walk.
ride, walk and roll, move and whatever it is now. Some of the LPPRP, for example,
Okay.
including some of those, because if you're just a regular resident,
Sure.
I mean, it's hard to go and try to find all of these things in the many reports that are out there.
But I think if you just listen to the things, by title, it may be intimidating for someone to go try to read a document. So maybe they have to have maybe a short paragraph with that, that says, this is what you're gonna find here.
Possibly,
Is it-
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't want it to be too burdensome for staff either.
Right.
Given that there are a dozen people that are gonna be looking at this report.
Yeah, we'll have to see what the best practice is now, because sometimes you don't necessarily want to create a hyperlink, those go bad, whenever you do it right, so. So we'll have to see what our IT department recommends
Yeah,
at the moment. But, yeah, a resources page, we do include that in Plan 2040, so that would be something we typically do. Okay. Yeah.
That's a risk, I think, about the links, in fact, they change over time, all over the place.
well, I mean, if you know the title of the report, you can just Google it, and hopefully it'll show up as well, so.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was the only thing I saw in the previous annual reports was the specifics, some of those tables that have come up in the past. So.
so let's go back there just for a second.
Pretty good.
Right, this might be just a good opportunity to look, sort of just do a rewind here. Same idea with the yearly summary. We do provide a little more information on the developer projects, but same idea, we can link to the county's website where we keep that quarterly list and map.
I think that's what I was thinking of instead of the priority projects.
And that's where we would also have the capital projects, which you had mentioned, I think, at the last meeting. We said we typically wait until the budget has now been adopted, wait until those documents are actually then published up on the website. We grab that information, we can update the website and just link it then through this annual report. Let's see, priority projects, we have them captured in the appendix. Development activity. You know, again, you can find a lot of this information, up on the county's website where we have our projects. You know, building permits, or signs, I don't know how important, if that is something that's critical enough to pull forward to this annual report. Most of these sort of higher level projects, like a self-storage facility, would then be captured in the running list and map that we create.
Mark, can I just, with this, I think this is really only helpful in context,
Mhm.
right? So I remember last time when we were looking at this, I was like, I don't know, is this a lot? Is this a
Sure.
small amount? Like, what's normal?
Well,
So I don't know that we necessarily need to include a list like this, but knowing whether or not this is what it looks like elsewhere in the county or even in other jurisdictions, that would be helpful, actually.
So interesting, I took almost the opposite approach on this, which is, I looked at these as metrics that would go against the objectives in the second half of the paper in terms of, if we want to say like, how are we doing if this is in progress? What are we saying it's in progress based on? And it could be like the solar piece, is we want to see solar being adopted in the project, so that would be a metric toward that strategy. Is how I was thinking some of these would go, is a different location, not the annual report.
Comparing it to other town centers, might be challenging, because
Yeah, they're also different, right?
yeah,
I know.
That's been the struggle we've had to, just for our committee, but like, how do we run? Because there's nobody to compare against.
Yeah.
And the county's search, and there isn't, like, we're kind of unique.
yeah, I think you might just need to be comparing it against itself in a trend line. Over the years.
I don't think that is very useful in the annual report. I would put that in my recommendations in the metrics discussion.
Okay.
Because then it's in at least context with other metrics and
Mhm.
what strategy it's lining up against.
Sure. So we talked about then other sort of capital projects or studies that are happening. Again, we can visualize this or find a website to point people to rather than providing all this text within the annual report.
One thing about the adequacy of infrastructure. I know Stewart's brought it up a lot, was talking about the maintenance when it comes to landscaping of. There's a lot of adding new items, like making sure to add sidewalks in certain areas. But I think having some type of solution noted of strategy of how maintenance towards these walkable spaces or infrastructure that will be added. Should be called out.
how do we do that? We say there's a metric we use to define the level of maintenance, or how do we, is there a mechanism by which that's done?
I think the first thing that pops to my mind would be that DPW has allocated funding for maintenance, while it's not specifically a CIP project, they have to have funding dedicated to say, okay, there's a broken sidewalk, we're gonna go fix. They probably, well, I hope they'd be tracking that spending as it come up.
And I think it varies by infrastructure.
Yeah.
So like the roads there's like a rating level. So when they drop to a certain level, they need to be repaired. And they're repaired on a regular basis where there's a schedule for it.
I remember, Stuart talking about little islands, little paved or bridge areas.
Yeah.
Between lanes. grass going through it, debris. He was talking about that too. Is that something that is included in there, or is that just outside?
Included in where?
This conversation we're having about maintenance. That's more
Sam and I will
beautification.
reach out to Public Works or other departments to see,
Maybe it's a
What-
strategy, like something like vendor, like I'm sure the vendors have to do something annually to show why their work to re-up to the impact or check in on, here's what we did, what we fixed, something like that, having some connection to know where there might be faults, or if there's not even a reoccurring that they're to be working on those things.
I think we're gonna have to probably push something like that. So I'm just looking over the strategy items. And I don't see anything that's clearly aligned in the strategy where we could link that.
Yeah.
So I think we'll have to like put that as a recommendation from the OTC to discuss at that time. Is that a modification in strategies to account for the long-term O and M of items?
Maybe under healthy community, or there was a built
Yeah,
environment.
the built environment is, it mainly focuses right now on code updates to promote certain types of development, but there's. I'd have to really bend any language I see here to say like the O and M cost of it is something to track, but I think it's a good idea in terms of like how much does like what we're seeing under some like cost over the long run, things like that. It's a worthy discussion.
Be the implementation plan over the master plan.
Well, just to talk of maintenance.
Yeah.
But we can go for it instead of that.
Well, I'm just saying that, you know, the maintenance could be a big issue. It could be like. On 175, I think Stuart pointed this out more than once. Last time we were at a meeting, showed us pictures of derelict buildings, the food truck parked outside the other building out there. All those things detract from the town center,
Mhm.
but we have no control over them.
but, and there's a process.
Yeah,
And sometimes it can be a timely process.
yeah.
Right, it's, because there are opportunities for the property owner to, correct their violation, and then it can be a back and forth, or it can stay that way, even if it goes to court,
So
that can take a while.
we can't do anything in this forum, but we can say it's important to consider.
Mhm.
It gets pushed off somewhere.
Like we have to, that's where we have to work with the county to add language for it to actually get monitored then. So it becomes part of the.
Okay.
Some of the rehabilitation might be, I have to look for the wording there, but like, just overall maintenance isn't, there's nothing in here that can map to, so we have to recommend a strategy update to have that get added, so it can be tracked.
The maintenance is gonna follow other rules, like mentioned Celeste about the roads, the improvement, that's on a schedule or on a.
Mhm.
So somebody else does that, we wouldn't do that.
We'll take a look at
I
it.
was just gonna say, I'm not sure if this really gets you where you want to go, but we do mention. The county does have a carrot in the ACR zero interest facade improvement loan program run through Arundel Economic Development. And that is tracked, I believe, in in the implementation. And I give you the numbers of how many people have applied for that.
Yeah.
If we're talking about commercial property improvements and that, that is noted in there.
Yeah, thanks.
We'll look into it some more. So then moving on to some charts about, education enrollment numbers, whether schools are open or closed. Again, we can point to the educational facilities master plan without including, all these charts in here. Again, the water sewer master plan, we can point folks to. And then population employment forecasts. This would be, I think this is one of the last sections here. Holding capacity, I've got some placeholders in the appendix for this as well. So I think the only then outstanding item is the population employment forecast.
I think potentially one note to put, since there is a 2025 column, is to possibly mention maybe even a sentence of what's been happening with so many folks, federal federal employees moving toward federal employees seems are a big population for, the people who are employed in this area, then it could, like, these numbers skewed in some way.
Well, so this is the 2023 report. Do we want to carry this type of graphic forward to 2025?
What value does it add? Someone reading this report,
If it's a person who's interested in learning about employment opportunities within Odenton Town Center, what is the viability of jobs in this area versus the people here who just happen to be employed? I can see that as two different things. So the jobs within the area, I think, would be more interesting versus how many people are employed who live in this area, but I could see both.
would that be a reference to where that information is housed? But,
You know, I think it's something interesting to sort of track again is, are there more jobs occurring within the Odenton Town Center over the years? Or is it less opportunities over the years? More people moving to the area? Well, I think that would be sort of indicative of how many residential projects are being built, right?
remember last meeting, we had a person who was here, had some complaints about the housing right here at the train station.
Mhm.
And that people were not moving in, businesses weren't surviving as well. That kind of information would be valuable to say, why isn't this working? What's wrong with it? Is that something that we can do, or how do we handle it?
Do you get any of that feedback, Caitlin?
I mean, I wish we had a crystal clear, if we had the perfect answer, we'd be
Yeah,
fixing it, but, I mean, one of the things we're trying to do is we have Project Restore funding from the state. Where we now have a grant to give to a business owner to move into select vacant properties. So because of exactly what you're discussing, we picked the village at Odenton Station for some spaces. And we've still had, they're on, I do know that they're on a bit of an uptick. In recent years, they just filled pretty large space. One of the, a larger company moved into one of the vacant spaces, so it is on an uptick.
okay.
And there's a lot of work being done towards that. Hopefully, the investments in the parking garage and all that around there will help, but
So I'm looking at this first number of 20 new expanding relocating businesses. That's looking at what's happening within the Odenton Town Center, sort of the good. What it doesn't reflect is any businesses leaving, right? Do we capture any of that information?
I have to ask Jonathan about that.
Yeah,
I haven't seen a lot like that. But let me ask him if we do that.
because I'm wondering if this number ought to be then sort of a net of, over the past year,
Yeah,
how many businesses have come to the area total, but we could also include it sort of in the smaller font. Below it is X number came, X number left. For
it could be
example.
a metric to see
Right.
how well we're doing.
Mhm.
But then you had net, you had people leaving. Now the question is, why are they leaving?
Mhm.
Well, I think one thing usually you would. A big analysis of the population is included first in a master plan to understand what's the population like now, do we imagine will be changing in time and that evolves, and that kind of sets the tone. For instance, if there was a growing population over 55, a growing senior population, that would frame how we think of what are the strategies for later. That's why we're talking about more walkability or more community health centers and more wayfinding for people who need help getting around. So I can see that it missing in this report, which could give some more understanding of these other sections. We kind of do it kind of adjacent way by saying like, here's how schools are changing, here's how employment's changing, but to just call out ages of people who live here, gender, race. I think could be more indicative.
So we can look into seeing how we can fold in some of this information and provide context as to why it would be important to include it in the end report.
Go back to the previous number, you talked about net. I'm
Yes.
concerned about a net value just because net requires context.
Mhm.
And it's not gonna produce a really clean, like, easy to read stat that you can bounce through, which is your current listing, because if the net is zero. Then basically a big zero there is probably not, or a negative number.
Well, so, right, that's why we're like,
I'm a
what do
little worried
you
about
do businesses, right? Yeah,
So just, I would be cautious, it's not, it's,
And to your point, if that's a single number, you don't know the context, as you say,
Right.
about what left or what came.
right,
Could be big numbers that came, big,
sure.
entity. The
Do we
small
have a
one.
vacancy rate anywhere in the report?
No,
Because you could have number of new businesses and what we do pull a lot of times is vacancy rate. So you could have, because
Right.
if you have very low vacancy, but a lot, if it equaled out, you don't have any more commercial space to put people in, so you're still full,
Yep.
Even if you said you've had so many new businesses come in, is that a metric that says anything? Maybe it's not that important. What's important is what is livability or what is the nature of the town center? More businesses doesn't mean that it's better on the center.
It shows interest that people want to be in the location.
Storage places is a business. Is that providing?
so.
Gas stations.
So for example, there's a couple different ways, I think, what is the point that we want people to take away from of the progress in this specific area? If it's that we want to show statistics that show that Odenton is getting a more diverse set of businesses, well, that's a certain type of metric. If it's the average age of a business in Odenton is increasing, or it is high already, I don't know. Like, that's a different type of metric that can show that view, but I think the question is, what do we want people to take away from this section? And the metrics need to reflect that takeaway, is what we're aiming for.
It'd be hard to do.
You gotta figure out the good numbers are first.
Right, and then it also comes down to the data that's available.
Correct, right?
Yeah.
We may not be able to get the metrics on it.
And just how to interpret that data.
But vacancy rate is something that you find across the board in lots of different areas. So that would actually be really interesting to me, because it would help to show how Odenton compares to other town centers, other areas of the state.
But-
Well, that's a good point. Do other town centers capture this metric? Is this something they use to figure
Are
out?
the other town centers required to do an annual report, like the Pearl Town Center or?
They do, they haven't started on their annual report for this year for Pearl, and then Glen Burdy does not.
It's not.
So I like the vacancy rate. It would be nice if there was a trend to say like, okay, if we have a 27% vacancy rate with a downward arrow
Yeah.
beside it, like now it shows like, oh, there are places coming here and staying. Or if the trend is up, the vacancy rate is increasing with an up. Now the story you're trying to tell us, there's more opportunity space for businesses because there's openings. Yeah.
And maybe developers are reading that, and if they see that, they'll be like, oh, okay, I should look into this area more.
Haley, we'll talk to see what they.
The story I think matters.
Yeah, I think we got it. Okay. And then just again, jumping back to, the 2023 annual report, we provide the, table for capital improvement projects. Again, we have that up on the website and we'll update that, by the end of the summer. as well as a map. That's also up on the website. This is quarterly development projects that you all receive as well as a map. So that's the 2023 report. That's
So I think a lot of those get dynamically updated on a periodic basis. So even just having a list, like Colette was saying, like of resources, the short descriptions, like for more information about Odenton, it's like go to like the acounty.org/OTC isn't gonna change.
Mhm.
It's like, then you can just list off, here's the things you're gonna find there. And it could be the subsections of all of this is
Okay.
basically that. And so you're pointing to a link that doesn't change, and all you have to do now is have a resources page there. And I think that covers everything we've talked about that's extra.
Mhm. Okay, so I think we just sort of went off on a tangent here, when we were talking about the OTCAC, the 15, so that we could sort of rewind, see what was in the 2023, see if we need to bring anything forward. All good then, so far with discussion, again, just based on the work that you all have done over the past year, and then we captured sort of the highlights here very successfully. So now we get into the topical chapters, again, natural environment, built environment, healthy communities, healthy economy, and process and procedures. The next, again, within each of these chapters, it's pretty standardized how we have the page layout, where we have the stats on the right-hand side. This is where we talk about, again, the strategies that have been completed, are currently in progress, or not yet started, and then broken down by their time frame. So again, this might be a good spot, Jason, if you think, to talk about whether you'd like to see the status changed, whether complete in progress, not yet started is adequate. Adding a fourth of ongoing, I think Plan 2040 may have that option. Or again, is if there's another status that better reflects what's happening with some of these strategies.
I would say in addition to that, natural environment, natural places. We have statistics, but we don't know what that means. So are we really doing that well in the natural environment? My opinion is no. So do we need to provide some statement there saying we're losing a lot of coastal areas, we're losing open space because of these reasons, even though we're at some percent of share. Do we add narrative like that?
I don't know if that's accurate as far as saying that there's a loss of forest in the Odenton Town Center because within the past year, right? Because we want to there we go. Here's where we have the stats of projects that were approved. And surprisingly, there was sort of an uptick in forest conservation and open space and green space as a result of that. I know it's sort of counterintuitive, you're building Starbucks, but where that Starbucks is being located, for example, the project at the corner of Maryland 175 and Baldwin, a lot of that area is already cleared. And so what that project has done is actually increased the forest conservation area. And they've introduced more green area as well. So, you know, again, I sort of want to make sure that it's not sort of anecdotal, but we're actually looking at the site plans and verifying how much land has that, or how much land is being protected, or how much forest is being protected, and how much isn't. Now, again, this was one year where we had only 2 projects that were approved, and I know they were coincidentally 2 Starbucks projects. One on a vacant bank site at a shopping center, which is all pavement, and then the other one on another site that was mostly cleared. This coming year, we will have more projects that will be approved. And one in particular is the Halley project, Block 4, as you're going up Town Center Boulevard. Going north, it's on your left-hand side, and there are a lot of trees. So this staff will change next year. And there we can provide some type of description. But I think this being a designated town center, there is that balance of we're not necessarily trying to protect all the trees in the town center. That's where we have zoned other areas as open space for some of our lower density residential zoning districts. That's the fact, is where you need to have dense areas is where you're probably gonna have a little bit more impervious surface.
I was driving through Columbia, Maryland, weekend.
Mm-hmm.
That's a planned community from the seventies.
Mhm.
You look at it now, there is a lot of forested areas all through. We don't have that here. I mean, across the street, across 175, next to the cemetery.
Mm.
There are a lot of trees in there in that forest. Oh, it's percent. So we're gonna lose that. We've lost wooded areas by the train station on this side. Some of the library park forest is gonna be gone. Other areas are disappearing. And we don't have maybe the amount of forested areas sufficient to see wildlife, not deer necessarily, but maybe birds. Or just the heat island effect that you get from moving the forest. So I don't know that these numbers that we see here are projecting the future. If all that property over there is developed, the forest is, we have fewer trees. And become, mostly developed cement areas and hard surfaces.
I think for the areas that we know are gonna be developed in that way, that's when it has to be prioritizing to help alleviate that, the stormwater management, the green infrastructure, the other means of addressing heat island effect and the loss of green space. I think in several presentations, we've seen that's been the struggle of sometimes having presentations where, because there might not be as much policy or requirement of things of maybe have options for permeable surface instead of impervious all the time, like some parking spaces that could have different types of drainage, or asking it for them to plant native or bioswale, anything around the development when we know there's going to be a brick and mortar or cement in that area. That is supposed to complement the trees and natural green space, but it's not coming across what we've had in these presentations.
Well, so on that, I think you're actually raising a really good point, is there's a difference between measuring, say, an individual project of how well they do, which is what the current stats are, and have we changed the cultural aspect of what we're seeing? Because really the point of the master plan is to change the way developers are thinking about a project to fit the goal of what we're looking at. So an overall trend of, are we seeing more projects? Are we seeing projects, like a majority of projects are exceeding the green space requirements? Doesn't matter, like that type of view doesn't take into account, it doesn't matter if you cut down trees or not. It's, are you exceeding the requirements for the landscaping in whatever way possible? And is that the cultural goal change we want for the master plan versus just raw counts or percentages of tree proportion? And so I think that's a difference that we need to think about in terms of what we want to report back to the metric on the master plan. It's either big picture or it's little picture. You have to pick that.
Well, and I mean, specifically, Martin, to what you're talking about right now, there are strategies in the back about the urban tree canopies. And I mean, I had some questions about those generally, because I don't feel like forest mitigation bits are really the solution for developing urban tree canopy. But I mean, that is where some of that feedback might be appropriate to include in the status update.
And that's what I was gonna say, sort of going back to, I think, what Jason had mentioned at the very start of this, is the body of the document is intended for just sort of a quick snapshot of where do we where do we stand with the strategies that were adopted in the master plan? We can't change what those strategies are, or what the intent really of those strategies is necessarily. And just a couple of the projects or highlights as they relate to the natural environment over the past year and some stats. If we're talking about, I think where we want to capture, is it happening or not, and providing some type of editorial on it is something that may be more appropriate in the implementation in terms.
Just thought of something now. Can we add maybe something that says for these individuals, challenges? So we talk about these numbers, we talk about what's being done. Do we highlight what the challenges are? Are there any challenges? Maybe that's a good way to say, challenge because of these reasons, or transportation is challenged because we're not seeing the local first class mile implemented. We're not seeing preservation of tree canopy because reason, I don't know. Would challenges be a category you could put within each of these categories?
Put challenges out there, you're gonna have solutions automatically. If you put a challenge out there, somebody's immediately gonna ask, well, what are you gonna do about it? And so
You could say this challenge is based on what the plan, how it was written. So maybe the challenge is next time it's written.
But that basically says the annual report, we're undermining the plan.
Yes.
And so we do have a challenge.
Right?
The master plan does have the challenges and opportunities. So, and that's what sets the framework for then the strategies that you find at the end of the report. This is just the annual report saying, how are we doing on those strategies? And again, highlighting just a couple cool things that happened.
In the previous section, you had a sentence that said, go to the table in the appendix, it'll give more comments about the status, and that kind of gets at strategy, challenges, status. So
Right.
maybe there's a more highlighted way to say that at the, because it kind of blends in between those two graphs, so that people know, oh, I can go to this table, maybe actually say the specific one, like appendix B.
That's fair, because the CD appendix is offset in between two pictures.
Okay.
And so it's less likely to be read. That's a.
So pull it to the same font as over here.
And it might be if to shorten the picture a little, sure, and make it actually part of the body of text. So that way it's apparent, like the details are in the appendix. I think that's a great point for every chapter.
Okay.
Maybe even the page on the left, the highlighted one. And just a note, since we're on that, I'd recommend putting actual number labels to the graphs. So if people want to go back to it, like graph 12, 13, just so you're tracking that, and consistency on some pictures have captions and some don't.
Mhm.
So to get to Mark's question, one of the points that whenever I was reviewing this, I talked to Mark, is in progress didn't really work for some of the items that we talked about on the table. Whereas it would be more, I think, informative, or more informing to the public of like, how are we doing in terms of the accomplishment of that? It's great that there's stuff being done, but is it stuff that's trending us in the right direction? Or are we saying that we're not trending in the right direction? I think it gets to a mix of some of the conversation we've had as well.
So making sure there's consistency on that column that says status, kind of know that.
Well, that's the tricky part, is sometimes in progress is a good thing, like the code updates is really, like, that's an in progress thing, it's working, what you assume is in the right direction, but, like, the amount of permanently protected natural resource and environmentally sensitive areas. Well, one project, which I think, like, we've highlighted in the, like, right on purpose to highlight a project that's doing it right, as a way to like, hey, kudos to you, we're gonna mention you, like, that's one out of however many. Two in this case, but let's say it's 1 out of 10, is that the right direction that we're seeing work? 9 out of 10 didn't want to do that. Well, that's it. All right, so we have,
Yeah,
We have 45 minutes.
I just looked too.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I want to make sure we have time to get to the table, so let's quickly, like, does anybody have any comments on the first section in terms of like the natural environment? Or any of these here that we want us to skip to and talk through?
Question, I was thinking about a partner, or curiosity if the county has partnered already when it comes to these goals of increasing conservation and green spaces, and if so, if that's something that would be called out for this?
Say under progress highlights, like
Yes.
spotlighting a partner.
Yeah, I know it doesn't want to come across as some type of favoritism or, I was just curious, given that
Yeah.
The Chesapeake Bay Trust has grants to help with tree planting. Actually met with the Anne Arundel County Coordinator a few weeks ago, and it made me wonder if the county is aware that there's a whole program specifically to help with that in this area.
Yeah, we can look into that. Now, the other thing too is, we're gonna be producing this every year for the next 4 years or so. So it could take a spotlight next year, or we could add it this year, so,
I
Just
think that
because
was
we don't
more
have-
like an aside question versus the report, since, you already showed some case studies there, which is
Yeah.
great in picture, so. That was just a suggestion of
okay.
the county is not working with them already.
Yeah, we work with watershed stewards, and I believe the Plan 2040 report actually has a spotlight on them, so. Let me see if we can work that in somehow, or if it's not already in an explanation for the strategy.
So just so I can follow forward, so let's keep going. So built environment is next. One area I thought would be useful to mention, the progress highlights on the next slide, is the affordable housing complex that's being built on 175. I thought it'd be nice to shorten the TOD a little bit and add an item about the affordable housing. So I thought that was a good success that actually should be listed. As one of my thoughts.
Could even add another page, unless you'd like the 4-page setup of, the title page for built environment, some stats, project highlight, and then key indicators. If you like that sort of 4-page, or if you don't care, we could add another page just for the built environment. It's more of a stylistic type of thing.
Could you say it one more time?
So right now, for each of our 5 topical chapters, we have 1 page is sort of this title page, just noting the goals. Then 1 page where we identify the stats of the strategies. 1 page identifying 1 or 2 projects as they fit on 1 page. And then 1 page for key indicators. And Jason had said maybe shorten up the TOD discussion and put 2 projects on here, the TOD, as well as Blue Oaks at North Odenton, or keep it the same length, but just add 1 more page, which now makes it 5.
You could have it just be a case study page. I think you should flip key indicators of progress, because it would read like, what's the progress on if I don't know what it's measuring again? So I would suggest flipping them.
Key indicators is just very general of anything in the built environment that's happened over the past year, anything noteworthy. So,
I like the 4-page format, I'll be honest.
okay, we can try to tinker with that.
Since nobody else wants to comment, I like 4 pages because it's nice and neat, and the way you have it laid out is you have your intro, numbers, flip, story, numbers, and it's a nice, clean dive.
Okay. We'll see what we can do to shorten that up.
Sorry, Governor Moore, we're gonna have to probably reduce some content from your plan.
Yeah. Okay. Did anything else here on built environment? Did we get any resolution on completed in progress, not yet started? Or do you want-
Let's move that to the second half.
Okay. So built environment, then healthy communities.
Just the built environment is such a big thing. I feel like you mentioned on the first page, the general blocks of what it is, but I think some things are getting lost on because there's so much incorporated to that. I get the idea of wanting to be consistent with the number of pages per section, but some categories will just be bigger than the other, where, transportation's a big topic. Land use.
But what, the part do we have content?
To me, the content, like when you look at the strategies, there's a lot of strategies there. There's not what to build up on, because we're talking about making Odenton be a destination, and walkability and understanding how much progress there is in that, or other public transportation access. That's a big topic. And when you think about an average resident, they will want to know those type of things that they're more familiar with. And you have a case example of, here was a problem, here's the solution we made, or here's what we're working on. I think that's a strong sentiment, because saying this section covers housing, transportation, historic property, and then saying this graph of 14 things in that category aren't done. I can't read, my glasses aren't that great to know what's already completed. I don't know in what sense that is. Of what it is to complete, like, is that all housing, is that all transportation?
Yeah, I actually wondered the same thing when I read this, because I wondered, so the pictures are all, first of all, of houses and like actual things that are being built, so you don't see buses. You don't see any sidewalks or people walking or anything like that, so it feels very much like it's focused on the housing piece and on the TOD, right? But also even smaller things in terms of, you know, sidewalks and some of these regular maintenance things that Martin was talking about. I understand that's not necessarily highlight, but in reading through specifically this chapter, it felt very focused on like developments versus some of the other pieces.
Yeah, and so that's the thing, is there is this balance of actually how much has been done or what's new over the past year. And I think if it's a paragraph, that's where we may just include it in the status update in the implementation matrix. We also don't want to reiterate what's already in the master plan as well. If it's just sort of a description of this is what the vision is for the OTC, we want it to be walkable, we capture that in the master. If there's an update and there's a lot of substance to it that's been accomplished, we can provide it under a progress highlight. But if things are just sort of starting, I think that's a better place for the implementation matrix.
Has there, and I'm just curious generally in terms of the format, I know that we've got like this first half and the second half with the appendix. But were the goals, policies and strategies at some point after these chapters? And that the chapter serves as the intro, and then you have like the list for the built community, and then you move on to the healthy community and whatever.
Yeah, instead of having it all.
Instead of having that all at the end and having the like readable stuff at the beginning. Cause I feel like they do end up getting like disconnected a little bit.
I get it. So I remember when we were writing the previous annual reports, we had the development projects up within the body of the document. And then at a certain point, folks said, this is really taking up a lot of room within the body of the document. Let's put it in the appendix. And so if you go back to 2023, that's where you find the charts for those. So that's what I'm afraid of, is if you put let me just go down here and see. So for example, built environment is sort of half page, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's going to be about 11 pages in the body of the document.
I don't know, those are the things you want to read, right?
Yeah.
So
Is it possible for those pages, instead of having it as one big long table, of have one appendix be or kind of have subsections within it to say like, this is one table of just this chapter, or just built environment, just healthy communities, because even just having that one big
So-
thing is a bit.
So for example, natural environment being first, cut it off here.
Right, new
Yeah.
page.
New page, built environment, sure, we can format it that way.
You get that fifth page in
Yeah, the tricky part for the content, like looking over like built environments, example, for what's been completed, a lot of it is process and policy work. It's not actual construction items that anybody outside of like basically us, the county, the developers would care about tracking.
And the 12 people who gather.
And the 12 people, yes. And the 11, the 11.
11, well, 10.
The two, okay, so the 10 people. Downloaded it, exactly, and that's some of the challenge here in terms of, like the size. I agree with you, Abigail, that hopefully as more gets done, this will get bigger to cover those goals, but looking at what's been done, it's like literally it's building things. It's the only thing in built environment other than changing the processes and policy to support building things in the transportation space or in the historic resources part, like changing this, the way, like one of the items here is just changing the sign guidelines for historic areas. That's completed. So is that something we could mention in historic resources? We could, but is it worth it? I think it'd be a question.
And I do also want to mention as key indicators, for example, this could change, or this page could change next year based on if there's something more compelling, or better reflects the vision or how to accomplish the vision of the town center master. Right, so for example, we included some of these stats, because workforce housing is important. So there was a lot sort of in progress or coming online that we wanted to highlight. There was like, wow, 33% of units are gonna be workforce housing. That's pretty significant. So next year, there might be another statistic.
Do you have sources then? Or just have the numbers?
Do we have sources of how many these units?
Like just putting the numbers there, like put a note at the bottom for like a citation source. Versus just having the number there.
I mean, we could point to the county website or where we have our chart, our development project chart.
It could be one of those things where you just have to put notes here and then all the way to the bottom of the document. It's going back to that. So it doesn't take up space in the bottom there.
Okay, healthy community is next. Any comments or statements from anybody in this?
Some items are lean, I will admit that, right, is.
Well, we saw that presentation, wasn't it, pickleball courts?
It was, they changed it because of the insurance meeting that we had.
Do
I
we know
didn't even
how?
know that something, that's a BOC.
Bocce.
I know that is.
Bocce.
Yeah, I think they changed the park and recs.
It's a lot.
Do we know, do we know how this is gonna work? I mean, you got bocce balls, we got horseshoes. Are the people coming to the librarian and saying, I need the bocce balls, I need the horseshoes?
Could be
How's it gonna work?
BYOB or H.
Good question. Good question, for park and rec.
Yeah,
And just for, I guess, a comment for Park and Rec, this is my question where it gets to the demographics. Like I've talked to Chad Jones where he mentioned that the majority of people, at the base are residents, it's a big Hispanic population. And I don't see many Parks and Rec, amenities that be looking at soccer or even like, I don't see basketball courts. I see these things, these recreational activities that are more associated with wealth or whiteness often. And if you think about a lot of these planned unit developments, which is most of new housing now, might come with an HOA if it's not a rental. The amenities there are typically just tent splits. So I want to be more mindful of looking into giving a note to Parks and Rec about thinking about the demographics of the place and outreach with those residents to understand what are the parks and rec amenities they would like to see, especially when we're thinking this is a park that's next to a library where a lot of people bring kids, and what will those kids want to play, not just recreational activities for adults.
There is a strategy.
Mhm.
C, under HC one.
There you
And I also wrote, that's not complete on there, because says it's completed, and I was like, no, that's.
I very much remember at that meeting about the park where a resident said, this is not Baltimore City. We don't need these types of certain amenities, which is affiliated with that type of not my backyard mentality that's coded.
All right, any other thoughts? There hasn't been a lot of progress, unfortunately, in terms of building on the parks, and hopefully this, it also applies pressure by keeping this as the height of things. So we're counting on the park moving forward.
And again, this was just phase one that's committed to it,
Yeah.
so.
The Healthy Communities chapter also indicates a lot of emphasis on Parks and Rec, and I was curious. I can't remember how much the master plan touched upon mental health or thinking about emergency preparedness, like.
Sounds like we should have Parks and Rec come in and talk to them.
Yes, because one thing I saw Baltimore City, sustainability office do was they emphasized they created this program for community resilience hubs, which, is thinking about training and education for health of people of all ages. It's also a location of, like today, we have extreme heat, thinking about.
Okay, so let's take those right into the part of recommend. You can ask about that. I think that's a great suggestion. This will already keep us, we have like 25 minutes left, so. All right, so moving on to healthy economy, which is, we already saw this one a little bit, we talked about it earlier, so if there's no objection, I'd like to skip past that to make sure we get to the other parts of this.
Is parks and revitalization being incorporated into the context? We have goals related to, some of it, I can see it in built environment, some of it's across parks.
Kind of strategy that, I don't know which strategy that maps on, whether it's. We can look for that, the next section. Okay, so. So we'll figure out what our strategy is to answer that question. Next, all right, so the process and procedures, this has been where the majority of the focus actually has been under the past few years. What you see at the beginning of simplifications of things, which is why you're seeing so much more completion is that. Any comments or thoughts on that? Yes, these are the numbers that aren't great, but it's just the reality of where we are. Which is why I think my question was, do we have content in the other chapters? The answer is no, because there's just nothing in the pipeline to generate content.
I think this is a section where outreach could be expanded on more in some ways.
That's a whole different, that's a whole big section.
And again, this relating to one of the strategies, right? That's what we have to sort of ground ourselves on.
And you said these strategies, they're pretty much set, so.
They are set, they've been adopted.
Not till the next master plan. Right. Chip.
On a positive note, it looks like several completed.
All right, any other comments on the first half of this? So, example, the project letter.
And yeah, we'll fill that, obviously. Acronyms. And then ultimately,
All right, so does anybody have any specific comments on, let's go through the first section, so we have the natural environment. Any comments or thoughts on what's in progress, what's not started, completion, any thoughts on if the status should be different for any of these items that something makes more sense?
I don't agree that establishing the forest mitigation bank is actually developing an urban tree management plan.
which number?
That is NE 1.2A.
Okay.
Like, I don't understand how the banks are supposed to contribute to Odenton urban tree canopy, because when I read this, my understanding is that there are developers coming in. And then they're like, oh, they actually need all of the space on this lot, so they're gonna make sure that this bank, that they have forest elsewhere in the county. So that they're meeting their quota, and then they can still take up most of the lot for the development. So I read that and I'm like, oh, it looks like we are likely to be losing unless the forest mitigation bank is in Odenton.
Yeah,
Yeah, let me get some more information on that.
I had that part too, so let's start.
And I do think having an ongoing for the status category would actually be really helpful too. Because there are some things that we're never gonna be finished.
Mhm.
We are never going to get to a completed state.
Right, so like, one of the concerns I have is D, where it's like the amount of permanently protected natural resources, environmentally sensitive areas, like there's an example of 1.28 acres being set, but. How does that ever get completed, because there's no actual measurable metric aligned. And so I use the KPI statements to mark, like there's no KPI for amount of permanent protected natural resources listed here to say, where are we in terms of that? And so I think that's where, agreed, it's either ongoing, because we're never gonna specify what the amount is, or there should be a specified amount, so. Like it's hit, and it could be a proportion of acreage, it doesn't have to be a specific amount. But I think that's an area where like ongoing would make more sense than saying, okay, we're done because Starbucks succeeded in conserving land, for example.
And that's why, again, is when you look back at this, for example, the green infrastructure master plan would say. Preserve 300 acres with an additional 300 acres in the next by year 2030, right? And that you can measure and get to and complete, right? So to Jason's point.
Right. I mean, or should we be measuring against like another master plan? It's like if they've achieved their goals, how much of that is in Odenton, and is that sufficient? Of that,
Odenton is different,
Yeah,
right, from the rest of the county.
Yeah, exactly.
It has a different sort of vision, and you have to,
so that's just an example of one that I think is more, I would say it's more trending. Are we seeing the trend in development projects versus not, versus completion?
and that could be something that's included in the status update for the sentence then. Because I feel like it doesn't always apply, the trending piece, but it would be interesting to some.
I think it's not super clear in either any of the charts, so I wonder which one could fit, is that type of. When we consider like shrubbage, like things if you made a bus shelter or a bench. On these sites and then put like a shaded structure over it that might have greenery or shrubbery or native species attached to it, if that could be fit within this. Like there's been examples of people who create bus shelters and the roof of it is a garden or a native plant, like could that be maybe at where it's talking about incentivize innovative sects or something? Well, that one says, I guess that might be like stormwater, but I'm curious where that could be an example within that natural environment, but I don't know which strategy we're looking at today, clearly. I'm sure I'd want to sit down on a bench right now, but if it has no shade, I'm not gonna burn myself.
Okay, anything else under natural environment? Well, let's go to built environment. We go to B 1.1 M.
1.1 M.
Yes. The comment, I don't know how to, the now
Yeah.
allows. What should that say? Just so I know how to. Is it,
Something happened here too, because when I saw this, I said complete, it says completed and there have been 0 projects, right?
yeah, that's,
So something happened with
Okay.
this,
I don't know how that's complete.
and the typo, yeah,
Okay,
so I'll take a look at that one again.
I mean, that could be started, it could be in progress, I don't know how to interpret that from.
I looked through that earlier today, I noticed.
Or G, where it was talking about the temporary use. Pop-ups. Is Anne Arundel EDC not, I thought working together to allow for more of that to happen, so it wouldn't be necessarily not started, but working with the partners or identifying partners.
I mean, we don't have a funding source for it, we're working on it, I don't know if you would say planning to apply for a
So-
grant.
So the intent of this one, I remember, was as of now, a pop-up retail or anything a temporary use, sorry, it would get permitted for, I think, 180 days, and then you have to keep renewing for 60 days or something, and you get 2 or 3 extensions. And I think what was behind that was we had heard from people that said they couldn't get funding because they didn't have that certainty that it would be extended past, say, 180 days or whatever the first threshold is. So the intent behind this was to change the code to make these temporary uses more permanent, but sorry, how do I say this, is have them last longer, extend the temporariness of the temporary use without it being permanent, right? If that makes sense. And fewer hoops to jump through than to get renewed for your temporary use. So that effort hasn't started.
For BE 1.2B, the council did pass the 2021 building codes, including the energy conservation code. So while that's only the 2021 code and not the 2024 code, which is currently available, that is a step in the right direction in terms of energy conservation. So I do think it's worth mentioning that those code updates can come to the county every couple of years.
And Mark, for the last description you just gave for G that you mentioned, could you not put that in the status to say like, this was a challenge, but you're working on it for this, or because it's not?
For this,
Yeah, what you just said about extending the days, is that not something you can write there instead of NA, or because it's
sure.
not committed, it can't be committed?
no, I think we can provide some type of explanation. I wouldn't say that there's been any challenge, it just hasn't been something that's been picked up.
I have a question about that, actually. There were a couple of things like that came up where I was like, well, what is our role as the OTCAC? Should we be writing to the council and asking for legislation, or the county executive, or are they also reviewing this? Is that? I mean,
That's the end of the year letter now, the OTCAC is the letter to the county council, because we never had that as a work item.
yeah,
Now it's a work item for the end of the year to summarize our thoughts through the year, to have something to actually say.
I mean, there were a number of things that came up as well in terms of capital projects where I was like, oh, why didn't we ask for this and reference this document and say, hey, this is why it should be funded because it's in this plan. And I just wonder about, our role with that, and if it's,
Yep, so in the fall.
There's a list
And
we're keeping track of, great.
There were a couple about signage, or at least one, and as an aside, I was wondering about with, the Anne Arundel connector, that free shuttle service, about removing some of the signs, because some of them are no longer stops, but the signs are still there, and that is confusing.
Okay. That might be just an email to our Office of Transportation to ask them if they continually evaluate or where their signage is.
I noticed there was one about form-based code.
Yep.
R that I'm kind of excited about.
Yeah.
I just wondered about it.
It's a big lift, right? It's not something that's conventional. It's,
Be a game changer.
it can be, and there's a lot of nuance to it, and, you've gotta, you get it right, because again, it's form-based, so it's not based on use. You have a gas station that looks like the form that you're intending, and it's still a gas station. So do you care more about the use, or do you care more about the form? So I think that's, what do we have that as, a mid? And I think before you get there, there's gotta be some analysis of whether that makes sense, even just for the Odenton Town Center. I've heard of communities that have a hybrid where you do have form-based code for just one area of your community, your jurisdiction, and the rest is more of a convention. So, yeah, there's gonna need to be some study and work put into whether that's appropriate.
For 1.3C, we're talking about the Mark Station West parking lot and how it's avoiding the wetland
Mhm.
parking garage. Didn't we just hear about, like, they're cutting into it a little bit?
That's the buffer,
Okay,
and that it would be, I think, replanted. So it's just during the construction that the buffer would be impacted.
okay. Right. And then further down in that H, we did discuss, the mural on
That's
the
right.
garage, and
Mhm.
so I think it would be worthwhile including that.
Okay,
I think that's H in a way. Because it says approve appeal of Odenton Park Station by facilitating public park or other placemaking initiatives throughout.
so are you suggesting that goes from not yet started to in progress?
I would say it's trending very slowly on.
I mean, that gets talked about, Stuart talks about that quite a bit. I think it's progress with
Mhm.
really fits.
For the, letters, BE 1.3, D.
Mhm.
Natural environment or not, sorry,
No,
one,
BE,
okay, sorry.
1.3 D. I'm a bit confused of that one, because it's talking about to make sure the parking garage does not include future TOD, but isn't that kind of foundational in what's already happening with the design of it?
Right, I mean, in a way, you could say it's complete because the parking garage team has submitted their application to the county and it does not preclude it. We could keep it as in progress until the project does get approved and it comes out of the ground. Right?
Is the design approved, like the not, so the not preclusion piece, is that basically set in stone at this point? Or is that still technically a variable that could change and where
I
they're,
don't think it would change. There's been a tremendous amount of work to get to this point of submitting the site plan for the parking garage.
okay. I wish it would be complete then, if that's the case.
What's that?
If it's not gonna change, and
Yeah.
that's pretty much set, then
Okay.
that means we're good. But if there's still a possibility of change, then do this in progress and make it complete next time.
But we don't know that. They could.
I remember one comment when the parking garage was being discussed at the very beginning, and I think one or two folks at a public meeting said, why don't you just take the whole site parking garage, it's built 3 parking garages. And again, it's under this current state administration, I don't see that happening. Governor Moore is very much in favor of TOD, and there have been a lot of resources for this project, so directed towards this project. So I never say never, but I'll sit back.
I have a question about 2.1G, about ADUs. I think we're specifically talking about external ADUs here, not internal ADUs, right?
Say that again, sorry, one more time.
G, 2.1G, encouraging the construction of accessory dwelling units. Because I looked at 623 and it
Mhm.
looks like it's external dwelling units for single family homes, so. I'm just wondering when it says no ADUs were constructed, I feel like we should specify external. We're not
Okay.
talking about internal, like if there's a townhome and somebody makes their basement into like a separate, right? Like that's not even something within the realm of what we're considering here.
I think that was considered an ADU.
I mean, it's supposed to be, it is an ADU, but I think for the purposes of this strategic goal or this strategy, we're only talking about external ADUs, just based on the language of the bill.
Cause if someone made it in their own home, be like, unless it's zoned to be like
Yeah,
multi-housing, then it's like.
Sorry, say that again?
Unless it was zoned to allow for multiple units in a home, that would be considered legal if someone made their whole bottom floor or whole other unit. For others to live.
It is, so I'm only talking about what's in the bill that's referenced here, which allows for ADUs, but it's only external ones. And I just want to be clear that if somebody is reading this, that they're not thinking that it's internal and external ADUs. That we're being
We'll
clear.
provide some clarification.
All right, so we have about 7 minutes left. I need to make sure we get public comment period as well. For G, I think your performance measure doesn't match your status update. I think you need to change the performance measure.
Yeah.
To talk about the status of code update or whatever that is, because it's encouraging it by changing the process and procedures, not by quantity and location.
Yeah, so our performance measure is adopted. We can't change that.
So it's gonna be hard to say that's completed now.
Yeah, I agree. I'm looking that over again. It is, I may have noted completed because we have to bill it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't match the performance.
But
measure.
I think G is one we should probably look in terms of revision that's in the future and say that measuring quantity and location is not encouraged.
Yeah.
Those don't belong. Okay, so we only have like a little bit left, because I want to make sure we have public comment period. Public comment. Okay, so yes, we need to hit that. So, any other final comments here in terms of thoughts on anything that you saw across the entire document? Because we need to make sure we reserve time.
On this table, these pages, I wasn't clear if you meant sort of footer to be on that left side, because you're on page by page. It doesn't follow right, or does it make sense for it to be more of a horizontal footer versus a vertical one?
We can,
So it'd just be another master page for that.
yeah, this was,
That'll change whenever you start breaking things apart as well by section.
Yeah.
So,
right, but you're saying the orientation, that should be, instead of vertical, it should be horizontal.
Right,
Or-
every other page, one
Yeah,
says
this,
the title, one says the page.
so these were created in spreads, right, as a portrait, and then I've rotated them in PDF. So, we can change the, like you said, master page of this.
okay, anything else before I have to close this topic out?
I do have a question. We have a lot of things in here that have a short time frame that have not yet been started.
We have 0 to 5 years is short.
So is there, I mean, when we have that as, you know, that, and then we have NA of the status update. Is there a, like, how can we ensure that there's accountability for moving that forward? Is there any way to include, like, hey, this is something planned for 2026 or whatever, so that it doesn't feel like it's just not getting any attention?
So that's the tricky part is,
Not our role, is it?
yeah, so that's the thing is some of these need to fold in with other departments or even state. Like, looking at this MDOT origination study, and fit into their work plan based on their funding
Yeah.
and resources, which they may not have.
Probably not right
Exactly, right, is. And
But
I
like,
think,
there's like this mobility study, and I was like, I couldn't find anything about this
No,
mobility study,
and
and,
I hate to say it, but we may need to put a disclaimer right at the top, big letters that says. Not all strategies will be completed within their timeframes or at all.
Yep.
Right, based on resources, priorities, politics, right, all that figures in. And that's the expectation.
Yeah. I think for me, with some of them, it felt very specific in terms of like, there's going to be a mobility study and we're waiting on this mobility study. But then there's no other information in terms of, well, what is this mobility study and when is this gonna happen? Where do I get information about it? And I know some of it is very dependent on other departments, some of it's like cyclical. But even if we have some of that information to add so that it's not just NA.
Okay, so a little more context within there. Okay.
Okay, so I'm gonna have to cut us off here and I'm gonna skip ahead to Jenna's comment, because I know we've got comments, so we'll hit members in the room first, then we'll bounce to online real quick. Please keep your comments brief, because the library will pick us out. So, you just say your name and then, comment. All right, somebody better go.
Okay, I'll go first. My name is Nadia. It's at the last meeting. My first comment, actually, I'll just piggyback off what you were saying, because I had a similar idea or thought. Was that, as I was kind of like trying to look at the document from here, one of the things that came up for me was that as a person who lives in the area and wants to know more, it's hard to understand which department is doing what. And, you're talking about the different departments and this department is needed. If you could put that in the document, when I was reading it, sometimes it was like the county did this. What department of the county did that? Is there any way to kind of put other additional information about who to follow up with in order to make it so that, because my thought was, this is a status report, but I think as we were talking, I felt like there was also an opportunity for this to be a document that allows for folks who aren't already in the space to be able to easily access the information and hold like the county accountable, hold developers accountable, and really be able to get involved. And so having that information is a huge help to someone like me who oftentimes feels like I'm spending hours just trying to find something. So that was a comment that I had, just to be off of what you said. The other thing I wanted to know was about the business section of the report. A comment was made earlier about the previous meeting and how the resident came and said that they felt that the businesses in the area weren't the type of businesses they wanted to see. And I think in that section, where you're talking about like the number of new businesses or in the area, if there was a way to say restaurants, cafes, or I'm kind of blanking, but like I think that's what the resident was referring. Yeah, exactly. He was referring to like, I want to walk to a place that I'm interested in, and seeing 20 new businesses doesn't necessarily get to that information. So I wanted to call that out. I think that was really what the resident was addressing. I have one more.
Last one.
Last comment was in reference to the operating and maintenance. I'm still learning about everything going on with like urban planning and how county works. But my other thought when we brought up operating and maintenance was the idea around what level of development that has been made
is like that tax revenue being able to produce, the required amount of like maintenance necessary, if that makes sense. So if you have a building and you're getting a tax revenue on it of, I don't know, a few thousand, and the maintenance for that, you know, the sidewalks in front of that property, the roads in front of that property, leading to that property aren't like meeting that tax revenue, or for that area in general, if that tax revenue for that area is not meeting the level of maintenance, then I would think that that is a problem and something that would need to be addressed. So this as something else to build accountability into the status report, just so that county is doing everything it can to make sure that you know, we're building spaces that are thriving. That would be another.
Yeah, so actually, what you said earlier is about looking at a collective number of actual items that are events that are happening and making assessment of what's happening as a general. And the development. We want to consider looking at the reputation of specific ones, which may skew it to a different way, but that's what they typically do. For example, we're getting Starbucks. They are known for developing as an early adopter, area that they foresee as growth coming up in 5 years. That's their reputation. They're coming in, a lot of people look at a sign, in my opinion, the other profit there. Another one too is that you also have to look at the type of things that are happening right now, compared to what happened last 2 years, and what they categorize from. That's in the previous meeting where you have now more gourmet and craft type restaurants coming in instead of the typical fast food that's coming in at the time. And that is an instant trend in a different direction because they tend to come with they see a consumer base who will patronize for that kind of service. And they will look to see that, and that will then also indicate that our person can consider that forward. The next of that is the more outgoing type of development. I see that areas where there's like percent of vacancy more up in the urban village, it's because that can be impacted by the fact there's not a lot of activities to draw people out to do more of an expenditure mindset. And where the park comes in, you might do that. You might see focus 1% around it or nearby it because on the other side of the train station, you want to have a connection across, area pedestrian bridge. So see that too, for example, the Liner project in Howard County, they're doing that right now. They basically cut off by 175. So they're putting a pedestrian bridge between the two together. And that is going to be a cost because it's going over a major state road. So also a way of bringing in actual incentives for developers, because Stuart said the last thing here that we look at it of their time. So it's kind of like a reverse dealer where we have to build what they want to see for them to come and build for us. And that's an unfortunate problem that I see here because we don't have the exposure in something that's but because of our unusual nature. This county is a weirdo compared to almost all our counties of Maryland. I remember I forgot that we are, yeah. Good morning, but yeah, so if you want to consider that way, that we have a lot of things that are changing with it, and you might or look at where things going instead of snapshot of one. Now my push is that rejected. Don't want to push that over.
Thank you. Appreciate the comment. All right, have to open it online. Daryl or Pat, do either of you have public comments? If not, don't raise your hand. If you do, please raise your hands. We can flag you. Okay, I'm gonna assume no then. All right, so bringing it back, because we have to wrap this up. Let's see, so I skipped over some new business. The only new business I wanted to let everybody know is, I did inform the county that I'm not going to, assume the seat for a third term. So, but I did say that until my replacement is appointed, I will continue to sit to make sure we have a quorum and help our meeting. But I just want to let everybody know that. Any other final business?
Just one other thing is I had mentioned the grant that the county applied for the state for TOD. We were awarded the full amount that was requested, $750,000. That'll go to support the funding for the parking garage. So we sort of get some tip money back that can go to some other public project.
It's great. Okay, could I get a motion to adjourn?
Other, we talked about asking about Parks and Rec.
Yeah.
What else will suggest economic development?
AEDC, okay,
Well, I know you're, but within,
Come back.
the county.
Okay.
To kind of ask those questions about what they're doing for outreach to.
so we refer to Haley for local farm to set up for county AEDC, okay. I think that sounds good.
And then an email about it, I sent you about it.
Yes. I haven't had a chance to talk to Mark about that, but, okay. We do have to clean, so can I get a motion to adjourn? Okay,
He made.
Andrew made a motion. Okay, do I have a second? Well, any objection? Okay, without delay, we are adjourned at 7:52.